and being.
It's very nice to be here. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I don't think I've ever had a screen that there's so many people on it.
I have a choice. I can do you this way, or I can leave you where everybody can see everyone else.
So are you giving me that choice?
Yes, I am.
I would love to see everyone.
Perfect. Absolutely. We'll go the way it is right now.
Awesome. That's great. Can everybody see me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Very good. Very good. So this is kind of new for me. I've never done a speech online before on a Zoom meeting. So just bear with me as we go through. I don't know how Janice Sue wants me to set it up. Would you like me to do questions as I go, or would you just wait to the ending to do questions?
It is entirely up to you.
Okay. So if I don't see someone raising their hand or trying to flag me down for a question, can everybody else help me to know that somebody's wanting to ask a question then?
Perfect.
That would be great. Is that all right?
Yes.
All right. So if you don't know already, my name is Elizabeth Wehman. I'm a Christian fiction historical writer. I just completed my 7th novel. I'm trying to do 10 novels in 10 years. I'm almost there. I've missed 1 year, so I'm gonna have to maybe do 2 in 1 year to catch up. But I've written, I have a big, probably fairly big writing career. I used to write for 2 of our local newspapers as a reporter, and then I also eventually ended up into editor position, which was really exciting. That kind of brought out the research part of me. I live in mid-Michigan, near the Shiawassee River. I wonder if anybody here has heard of the Shiawassee River.
No.
Oh, some. That's good. That's good. So I love history. And I also, being a reporter, I think I love the research part of my job more than anything else. And so as I started to write novels, I would just be making up stories. My first 4 are contemporary fiction, so they're not really historical. But I'll tell you how I found out about this one settler that came into Shiawassee County in 1833. And how that started and how I began to write history was I was trying to write a book about, a nonfiction book about one of our local historic sites here in Durand, Michigan. I live in Owasso, but Durand is close. And they have a famous depot there, a train depot. And we were trying to find out who had bribed a surveyor for the train company to put the depot in Durand. They said that they gave him $500 to do this, and that was probably at the turn of the century, probably the late 1800s. So $500 back then was a fairly large amount of money. So as I was researching trying to find these names of these men that had done that, I came across my protagonist in my book, Hosea Baker. He was one of the first farming settlers to come into Newburgh in 1833. And there were so many little snippets about him and his family and all of the notes that I was trying to research that it was almost like there was a rabbit trail. And I totally abandoned the depot research and went totally after this man, this farmer, who I started to read about, which was, for me, it was a godsend. I'm shocked of how much I've learned about this man and also this little town that was in Shiawassee County at that time that it no longer exists. And I've lived in the county my whole life, and I was shocked that there was a little town here that I didn't even know existed at that time. So I did have a lot of my research come out of course, newspapers, but also from the most important book was The Past and Present of Shiawassee County, Michigan. There's 2 editions of that. One was published in the late 1800s. The second one was published, I think, 1904 or 1908. I can't remember that for sure. But both of those talk about counties in Michigan, how they got started, who started them and such. So I got a lot of my research from that. But I also picked up on a ton of books that people were giving me and were in the library of people that had been in the history and had written about it, and I could go back to the library and get their books too. So that's where I got a lot of my research from, which was pretty exciting. So then I came across Hosea. He sold a farm in Pennsylvania and proceeded to use those funds that he had sold his farm in Pennsylvania to purchase 600 acres here along the Shiawassee River in Michigan. He did find a great place to farm along the river, but he did have to blaze a trail from Pontiac. If you know Michigan at all, Pontiac's kind of south of here. And he blazed a trail clearing the land as he went, which, if you can only imagine, if you've ever been to Michigan, we have plenty of trees. I can't imagine what it was like before, when it was primitive and no one had come across the land yet. So that was pretty exciting that he had to blaze the trail all the way here. He loved the trees too, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as he blazed the trail, he would follow a lot of the Indian trails that came. A lot of them existed along the high banks of rivers in Michigan, only because the Indians used those. It was better to go on trails like that than to make bigger trails. I think they were afraid of other Indians coming upon them in the trail and maybe taking their lives during those times. So there also were things called Indian clearings. And we're kind of not sure what that term actually means, but there are Indian clearings along the river, and they said that that's where they would put the ponies, the Indian ponies. Well, Indians, and a lot of times they would also farm that part of the land. Indians weren't really good farmers. They didn't really even care about their ponies all that much. They let the ponies feed off the ground. They would plant crops till all of a sudden the ground wouldn't produce very good crops, so they would move. So what happened then was, as Hosea came north, he was trying to find a location along Shiawassee River. He hadn't yet purchased his land. He did that a little bit later. But as he was coming, he came across an Indian clearing and decided this would be a good place to start a farm. So they said they were made up usually of just the native grasses, but it was also free of trees. So probably after blazing a trail all the way from Pontiac, he didn't want to have to cut down a bunch of trees to make his crops. So he made a cabin out of basswood logs and a roof out of elm bark and split logs made up their floor. And what he brought was probably limited furniture, certain tools and implements, and he probably also brought his own seeds to plant. His daughter came a little bit later. She brought with her apple seeds from Pennsylvania, and those soon produced an orchard for Hosea in the area. And if you're familiar with this area of Michigan, we have a lot of apple trees, and that's what was started pretty much here, and that's what Hosea started as his crops as well. Maple sap is very prominent here as well and plentiful, and the Indians also. I hope you're not offended by me calling them Indians. Sometimes I call them Native Americans, but I have to call them Indians in my books because that's what they called them in 1830. So they also would do maple syrup harvesting along the banks of the river as well. That was pretty interesting how they did that. They would cut troughs out of basswood logs usually. They would put the sap in the basswood logs, and then they would throw in heated rocks to heat up the sap to get it to boil. And then often they would make either maple syrup, or they would also make maple sugar. And they would usually use the elm bark to store their sugars and everything and bury them. They buried them in the ground so that they could be stored well. Most of the early settlers were subsistence farmers, and most of them grew wheat and potatoes here in Michigan, and they also raised cattle and sheep. So how did a settler buy their property? Now, this is fairly interesting. You could go into Detroit, which that's where most of the settlers came in because the Erie Canal had opened in 1825. So they started to come by steamboat or paddleboat into Detroit. They would seek out a surveyor's office and go to his office, and he would show them the property that was available to purchase. They would sight unseen, pick a section of property. They would pay $1.25 an acre for it. And then they would take a map that the surveyor gave them, and the map would direct them to their property. And once they got there, they saw what they bought when they got there. I think that's a crazy way to live, but that's how they did it back then. He was the first farmer in this area to purchase land, till it, farm it, and then he lived and died here in 1842. So I mentioned a little bit who was here before the settlers. First of all, of course, they were the Indians. Here in Michigan, we had the Ojibwa Chippewas, the Ottawas, the Sauks, the Potawatomis, and also the Fisher and the Shiawassee tribes. Most all of their villages existed along the Shiawassee River. This is near where Hosea settled. And there was also a spot here along the river that a lot of fur traders had put their post there earlier in 1800s, which the area in the river there contained a salt lick. And they say a lot of times the Native Americans would put their meat and such in that salt lick to preserve their meats. It also, this area was also infiltrated with a lot of natural springs. So that was really important too. There was a natural spring even on Hosea's property, which probably helped him select that part of the land too. Indians would plant usually mostly corn and turnips. They harvested, of course, the maple syrup, but they also predominantly lived off the wildlife in the area, which included deer, bobcats, wolves, rabbits, beavers, and also the fish that was in the rivers at the time. Unfortunately, many of the settlers coming into this area brought with them diseases, including smallpox and Asiatic cholera, which pretty much decimated the tribes that were here along the rivers at that time. Before the settlers came, we had fur traders along the Shiawassee River. They were the first white men to arrive in the area. Most of them were French. They erected posts along the rivers all the way from here all the way up to in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Where Hosea Baker settled, there was a sweet spot there that the fur traders particularly liked. It was by the Salt Lick and also by the natural springs. And they were influential and beneficial to the Native Americans as interpreters and also negotiators with some of the settlers as well, and also as with the government at that time. Farmers like Baker soon began to grow corn and potatoes, turnips, beans, squash, pumpkins, and melons. The produce was stored in cool cellars between dry leaves and straw against the walls. And then during the winter and cooler months, they would check them periodically to check for rotting food, hopefully to get that out so that they didn't contaminate the rest of their stores. In the attics, they would store medicinal herbs as well as culinary herbs. Also, black walnuts are prevalent here, as well as berries. We have strawberries, raspberries, lots of berries. It was reported that corn was planted when the leaf buds on the ash trees opened in the size of a squirrel's ear. I thought that was an interesting tidbit. The growing season here in Michigan is approximately 120 days. We do have to worry about frost, of course, even here as late as May. So if the evenings grew cold, many farmers would make their crops wet right just before sunrise, which helped prevent against frost. Corn was cultivated in hill places rather than far apart, and they used short wooden hoes to take care of the land. There were two kinds of corn, an early blue form and a white form that ripened a bit later. Popcorn was also grown, which the Menominee Indians called mouse corn. I don't know how that name came about. But corn was usually boiled, roasted, or dried to be ground later and put into stews. Hosea also was very fond of the trees here in this part of the country. it's reported over and over again how much he loved the trees. After farming for a bit, he built one of the first sawmills here in this county using the power of the Shiawassee River to fuel his mill. And later he also, I'm not sure if it was at the same location, but he also formed operated a grist mill. He was buried under a blackjack oak tree on his property. And at one time, that tree was the largest blackjack oak tree in the state of Michigan. 4 generations of the Baker family are now reside and buried where that tree used to be in the same cemetery. Unfortunately, the tree over Hosea's grave fell in a large windstorm in 1984, but at that time it was 87 feet tall with a 220-foot girth and 100-foot spread. Normal blackjack oaks usually grow to only 20 to 30 feet tall here, or are 6 to 14 inches in diameter, so that was a huge, enormous tree. Clay is common here. I don't know if clay is common very many other places, but it's very common here in mid-Michigan. Farmers and the gardeners around here just hate our clay soil. It's just hard parts of the soil. But back in Hosea's time, the Indians really liked the clay in our soil because they made Chippewa pottery. And that was very prominent and very well liked and well known here in the area. It was replaced once the settlers brought in copper kettles, and they soon realized that copper kettles things could be cooked in that much more than they could be in this Chippewa pottery. So why did they enter the territory of Michigan in 1833 or around that time? I kind of mentioned that before. The Erie Canal opened up in 1825. So steamboats and paddle boats came into Detroit from as far as away as New York State. And of course, the land was cheap at $1.25 an acre. Also, they would hear about the land, the cheap land, amongst other people, family members, maybe that had sought out the property first and had already settled here, and then were able to relay back to family members, hey, this is a great great place to live. You should come this way. Absolutely. And then also they had ads. Governor Cass at that time had settled or had negotiated with the Indians to sell portions of the land. So he put out newspaper ads in a lot of the newspapers back east, and that was some of the reasons why the settlers decided to head here for Michigan. So why did I write these books? Hosea fascinated me, only because I can only imagine having to be a farmer back in the 1830s. That sounds like a task all in and of itself. Farmers have a hard enough job, but to have to fell all the trees and to take all the trees out and get the crops ready and the ground ready for farming sounded like a job. He also lived in this county, and like I had mentioned before, he lived in the place where I had not even known that there was a little village existed, so I wanted to know all about him. But the more I read about him, the more I fell in love with his family. He had one son and 4 daughters, and he brought them all from Pennsylvania, not knowing what they were going to find at the same time. Some of the cool aspects of his family were his daughter, when she was around 14, killed 3 wolves on their property. 3 wolf pelts went for $30 each. And so to kill 3 wolves in one summer probably helped them greatly in their process of being here. The first baby girl born in the county was Hosea's granddaughter. She was born on October 30th, 1833. The daughters, this is one of the biggest draw for me, the daughters would sing hymns. And they said that often as the Baker family were heading through the county, they could hear these girls singing and knew it was the Baker family as they headed to wherever they were going. I thought that was pretty special. Hosea also, unfortunately, he was trying to protect his chickens at one time, and he killed what he thought was a wolf. The next morning when he woke up, he realized it was one of the Indian chief's personal dog. So that didn't end out very well. The fur traders at that time were able to negotiate and help him out of that situation, and tried to tell the Indians he did not know he was shooting your dog. He thought he was just shooting a wolf. Get away from his chickens. So that was pretty interesting. Also, when the settlers arrived here, not only did they find very primitive living conditions, but the mosquitoes here were intense. Many of the accounts of the early settlers tell everyone how bad the mosquitoes were in Michigan when they first came. So I don't know why they didn't think that was something to avoid. I would have avoided it, but they were just coming to find new land. And they said often that when the women would knead their dough into bread, the mosquitoes would even get into their dough. So they would often probably eat multiple mosquitoes at the same time. That's how bad they were. So all of these and more I have included into my books. Like I said, I'm on my 7th book, but this particular series about Hosea Baker is made up of 3 books so far. I'm going to publish the 4th one probably in June of 2023. It takes me usually a year to complete a whole book. They are fiction, of course, but they are based pretty accurately on all of the history of the time and on specific true people that were here at that time. Some of the neighbors I've had to make up people, but usually most of the people, some of their names are familiar and are buried in the cemetery with Hosea. So I also, which has been really fun in the last summer, have done some historical tours. The historical tours, I dress up like a settler, just like they would have back in 1833. And I take my guests to 3 different spots along the Shiawassee River. One spot we talk about the fur traders, another spot we talk about the Native Americans, and then the 3rd spot we go to, we end up at the cemetery where Hosea is buried, and we talk about his family and all of the settlers that were here at the time, and also the little village that he established. It was called Newburgh, the little village, actually North Newburgh, and it was named after the doctor, the first doctor to come into the area. He was from Newburgh on the Hudson, New York State, and he decided to name the little town Newburgh. So my books are all available on Amazon. You can get them just by Googling the titles or my name. And I would also like to offer all of you, if you would like a signed autographed copy of any of the books, I would be more than happy to mail them to you. And I can just either send you an invoice, or you can also pay through PayPal or Venmo today. So the books are, the first one is called, let me show you. The first one's called The Year the Stars Fell. That's the first in the series, and that one's $15. You'll have to read it to find out what the stars have to do with Hosea's life. I don't want to tell you because that would ruin the book. The second one is Crooked Pass. That's the second in the series. And that talks a lot about his daughters and the lives they were leading at the time. This one's $16. And then the last one I published is Shallow Roots. And Shallow Roots is $16 as well. If you would like to maybe purchase all 3 from me directly, today I'm going to give you a great deal of $45 for all 3. So that's it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Magnificent presentation. Why don't we take questions at this time? Does anyone have questions? I agree, Mary. Accolades to you, Elizabeth. You did really good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Do we have questions?
I have a question. I'm Maria Blinn from Illinois, and I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in the Shiawassee area in Holly, Michigan.
Very good.
Yeah, I graduated from Holly High School. So my question to you is, on your tour, you mentioned that you do 3 stops along the Shiawassee. What towns would those be in?
Let's see. The first one I think is Geck Road Park, and I think the address is Durand. Mm-hmm. If you know of the area very well, it's Durand, Michigan. Then the next one is at the Chi-Town Park, which is, I want to say that's Vernon. I don't know the address specifically on the parks, but it is close to Vernon, Michigan. And then Newburgh Cemetery, of course, is kind of between those 2, and it would probably maybe be close to or listed as Bancroft, if you know any of those areas.
I do, and my farmers are from those areas as well. And I don't know exactly what year that they came, but I do know that Lucinda Moody was born in 1846, and she was born in White Lake, Michigan.
Okay. I don't know if I know where White Lake is.
It's outside of Holly. It's teeny
Okay.
tiny. Everything up there is teeny tiny.
It is, absolutely.
So I love the idea of your books.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. When I was in the kindergarten, we took a class trip from the Holly Depot and we went to Durand.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Is there anyone else from, yes, Sue?
Well, I don't really have a question, but I'd like to introduce you to some of the names in my family in Shiawassee County. You have a Baker, I have a Barker.
Oh.
And your last name is Wehman, and I have Weedman.
Oh, okay.
And
I heard that.
one of my lines also came here in 1833, but they were on the other side of Wausau, so a little bit to the north. They came from England, and they were a last name of Shepherd and married to a Freeman. So if you need more stories, let me know.
That would be good, because after this next book, I need to start something different. I have a
question.
Yes.
I'm Cindy Seth from Indiana, and I know a lot of Indiana settling in that time period were land grants for military service. Have you found much of that in the state of Michigan?
No, not really.
Okay.
Governor Cass, I mentioned him in, I think it was 1816 or so. He did take over 1/6 of Michigan lands to be settled. That was a lot of territory that he took over from the Indians. And I think it was mostly settlers. Most people that came were from New York and everything. So they were pretty much settlers that didn't have a lot to do with the military, I don't believe. I haven't heard that, Cindy.
Any other questions or comments?
Is it Mary Ann?
Anyone? No. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm going to explain a couple of things that's going on in our society. I do want to thank you so much. We will be getting a certificate out to you for the participation today. And we thank you so much. For those of you who are or have registered for the 5K, this is what your 5K medal looks like. It's wood. See if I can get a good picture. It's wood and it's lightweight, but it's fairly thick. And it is adorable. So $35 for the 5K race. And it doesn't take much to do. I think we've already gotten almost $2,000 in for scholarships from the racing. So thank you so much. I will share. Elizabeth, would you share your email address in the chat, please?
Yes.
And perhaps your phone number if you don't mind.
Nope, I can do that.
Good, that will help. That will help some of those of you who have just asked questions. So while she's doing that, let's share a screen and let's see who's going to get one of Davina's surprises. Pat. Is Pat here? I don't think I saw her. Is Pat here?
Which Pat?
Wagner, W. It was just up, W-A-G-N-E-R. I did not see her. We'll do another one. I'll leave it up quite a while this time. Did anyone see Linda Mizell?
No.
All right, well, I guess we're going to do, I'm going to give 2 out. Sue Fitzpatrick. Well, we're getting some good ones. So Sue Fitzpatrick. And the last one, or Jane.
Woohoo, got one.
You got one. Love it. Fun.
Very good.
Just fun to do. Just fun to do. So we'll pick some neat things and send to you this. It's a lot of fun to do these. So I do have questions that I want to ask all of you. I have a lot of people who are saying that they want Saturdays versus Sundays. And I want to know how many of you raised your electronic hand or your regular hand. How many of you would attend on a Saturday versus a Sunday? Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3. Okay, I have 3. So I'm assuming 38 others are wanting Sundays. All right. So now I'm going to give you the next one. 1 o'clock Central Time, 3 o'clock Central Time. 1. Mary Glenn says 1. So how many want 1 o'clock Central?
1.
Okay, that looks like that's got the most. Anybody for 7 o'clock in the evening? Thank you so much. All right, with knowing this, we will continue with what we have been doing in the past. We will do Sundays at 1 o'clock. And I will be, we're scheduling the one for October at this time. We love for all of you to give us ideas for who to have. Marianne Davidson is with us right now. She's going to be our speaker for next month. And thank you, Marianne. We're publicizing you and showing you off, but what, if you don't mind saying a couple of words right now? You'll need to unmute, ma'am. Well, it looks like it's not going to.
When is it in September, Genesee?
Let me look for you. Marianne, do you know the date? Isn't it the 3rd weekend in September?
Is that whenever it's gone to DCA?
No, I think we're.
Or to Oklahoma, either one?
I'll look. Davina's looking for us right now. It is October the 4th.
You said, I thought you said September.
September, Genesee. September.
I'm sorry, September 4. September 4th.
Oh, the 4th of September. Oh, the first Sunday in September.
For Marianne.
Yeah, I finally got myself unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Marianne. So Marianne is going to be our speaker September the 4th. And you have quite an interesting topic coming up.
Am I to comment?
Yes, you may, please.
Okay. Well, I was very fascinated with the presentation today because my presentation is of a similar nature in that I look at the opening of the frontier in West Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, etc. And I have a bit of a different approach. I look at education and religion, the social mores of the time, and the focus is on the children's experiences. So I hope everybody enjoys it and come with plenty of questions.
Thank you, Marianne. We certainly thank you for being our next speaker. And again, if you have any recommendations for us, please email, text, phone us. We'd love to go with somebody you would like to have. With that, I'm going to say goodbye because I made homemade ice cream at just before we started. So the electric machine is off and it's nice and been packed and solid and it's perfect. So I'm going to ask Glenn to please do a toast for us.
Okay. On behalf of the officers and members of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers, I would like to thank Ms. Wehman for her presentation today. Michigan was a crossroads of trade and commerce long before the United States came into being, and following the American Revolution was the key in the development of the Great Lakes region as the United States expanded westward. Today, we were privileged to learn a bit about how one family of early American settlers helped transform Michigan into a vital nexus of agriculture and commerce, while also linking the burgeoning economies of the Midwest and the Great Lakes with the East Coast. One of the things that brings me joy is the eagerness of our society members to learn something new, and the turnout of several dozen members for today's lecture only reinforces that observation. Ms. Wehman's presentation was yet another example of the fine educational opportunities this society furnishes its members on a regular basis. Let us raise our glasses, or whatever you have, to show our gratitude to today's guest speaker and to wish her a long, successful life filled with health and happiness. Cheers.
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 Glenn, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much for letting me be here.
You are welcome. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. Glenn, thank you for always coming on when you're working. And
my pleasure.
Each one of you so much. Glenn works for the power plant in San Francisco. I'm kind of cut down a little bit on what you really did.
That's fine. Yeah, no.
well,
close enough.
While we have just a few of you, raise your hands if you're veterans. Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to thank each one of you for your service to our country. Thank you so much. 5 of you. Thank you again. Until next month, sending farmer smiles and farmer hugs. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.